record. Item. Just make sure everything is optimized and we're good to go. All righty, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to lesson 2 of our very special course, Secrets of the Bible, Iconic Stories, Mystical Meanings, and Their Lessons for Life. As we mentioned last week, we're going to delve each week into another well-known tale, another well-known story of the Talmud, and each week we're going to dig deeper and we're going to explore the unexplored mystical secrets of those stories. We'll discuss their mystical meaning and what it has to do and what it means to our lives today. Last week we spoke of Adam and Eve and the serpent, the tree of knowledge. This week we're going to talk about Noah's Ark. As mentioned, Noah's Ark is something that we kind of feel hits close to home. We just had a wonderful tropical storm this weekend, and so we all know what it means to see a little bit of rain. Thank God, devastation was much less than in the tale of Noah. Once again, we're going to watch a film that will introduce to us the basic story that we are already quite familiar with. We're going to review some of those texts, following which we'll do our discussion. The text and all the information will be presented on the screen, but for reference, if you wish to follow along, or for future reference, it's found on page 38 and 39. 38 through 42 or more in your student book. But again, please take a look at the screen as we play the film. And we'll just give a welcome to those that are here in person. Wonderful to have you all on. And we'll also welcome those that are going to be watching in the future. A few of our members last week watched following the lesson, and we'll do the same this week. So welcome to all those that are here in person and those that will be joining us in the future. I'm going to be muting all the attendees right now for the purpose of this film. And it might stay muted afterwards, but please feel free, if you have any questions, to either raise your hand so I can see you, or unmute yourself so you can ask that question. If it's applicable and relevant, I'll respond. And if not, I might ask you to hold it to the end of the lesson when we'll have a little schmooze as we did last week. So please sit back, relax, and check out this little film, the story of Noah, the flood, and the ark. Go.
God saw that the evil of man was multiplying upon the earth, and that every impulse of the thoughts of his heart is only evil all day, and he was pained to his heart. And God said, I will erase the human being that I have created from upon the face of the earth, from man to beast, to crawling thing, to bird of the heavens, for I have regretted that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of God. These are the chronicles of Noah. Noah was a perfectly righteous man in his generations. Noah walked with God. Noah fathered 3 sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth. God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupted, as all flesh had.
I'm just going to pause for a moment. Do you see the video? Give me a thumbs up if you see the video.
No, I don't see it. I don't see it.
Malka, you don't see the screen?
No, I don't see it. I see you. I see the participants. I don't see the video.
All right, let's see if we can figure this out. So you know,
Where's the video?
Hold on. Malka, you need to minimize the window that's showing you everybody, okay? It's something that you need to figure out on your end. There's a way to minimize your window. everyone else is indicating that they're seeing the screen, there should be a way to minimize the people and so you can see the screen. Can you look around for a button that might help you minimize that? Okay.
That only.
And God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, as the earth is filled with violence from them. And here I will destroy them from the earth." Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, and coat it from within and from without with pitch. And thus you shall make it 300 cubits, the length of the ark, 50 cubits its width, and 30 cubits its height. Bottom, second, and third levels you shall make it. And here I will bring the flood of water upon the earth. All that is on the earth shall expire. I will establish my covenant with you, and you will come into the ark, you and your sons, and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And from all that lives, 2 of each, bring into the ark to keep alive with you. Male and female they should be. And Noah did as all that God commanded him. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, all of the well springs of the great deep split open, and the hatches of the heavens were opened. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. The waters increased, and they lifted the ark, and it rose above the earth, and the ark moved upon the surface of the waters, and the waters surged upon the earth 150 days. God remembered Noah and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. In the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. The waters went on diminishing. In the 10th month, on the 1st of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. And it was in the 601st year, in the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was fully dried. And God spoke to Noah to say, "Go out from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons, and your sons' wives with you. All the animals that are with you, take them out with you." Noah built an altar to God, and he brought up ascent offerings on the altar. God smelled the soothing aroma, and God said to his heart, "Never more shall I again curse the soil on account of man. For the impulse of the heart of man is evil from his youth, and never more shall I again smite all living things, as I have done." God blessed Noah and his children, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And the awe and dread of you will be upon all animals of the earth. In your hands they are given." God said to Noah and to his children with him to say, "And here I am establishing my covenant with you, and with your seed after you, and with all living souls that are with you. My bow I have set in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of covenant between me and the world. And it will be, when I darken clouds upon the earth, and the bow will appear in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and all living souls, that the waters will not again become a flood to destroy all flesh. This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth.
Well, my dear friends, that was the nutshell of the story of Noah's Ark, the flood, the destruction, the recovery, and God's promise, along with the rainbow. If I was giving a title for today's lesson, I would have called it The Mystery of the Rainbow. Because as you may or may not have known, Judaism has a lot to say on the subject. But first, let's go back to the beginning. We just gave a basic overview of the story, and the story itself raises many compelling questions. And obviously, we can't discuss every single detail, every single aspect of the flood, because this is only an hour and 15-minute discussion, and we would have to spend several days on the topic. But let's dig a little deeper, and let's examine a few of the really glaring issues that arise from our question. But first, I want to get rid of an elephant in the room, but we are not going to spend the bulk of tonight's night discussing, but I just want to address one issue. The issue that probably initially comes to mind, which is how does God, in all fairness, destroy every living creature, including children and animals? How do we make sense of that kind of devastation? This is a question many people ask, and that's not going to be the comprehensive focus of tonight. But I just want to explain an important point, which is the flood, the reset, was really not about a punishment. But as we read in the narrative of the flood, in a sense, it's God's reset. God is entirely resetting his earth. That doesn't mean that there wasn't pain and there wasn't destruction. But the purpose of this flood was simply because God was unhappy with the work he did, and he's getting a redo. He's trying to have a redo from at his creation. And so the way the Torah understands creation wasn't spontaneous. It didn't simply erupt. It didn't just happen. Sorry, we're just going to admit everybody as they come on. God chose, because he desired to, created the earth. And in order to create an earth in the model that God desired, he gave man freedom of choice. And that was much of what we discussed last week, that human beings have the ability to make a choice. Now, for God to really empower humanity to have freedom of choice, God also allowed man to mess up, right? Because to be able to choose good, you have to be able to also choose evil. And God gave mankind the ability to mess up so terribly that they would reach what we refer to as the point of no return. Such an extreme degree of wickedness that it was almost irreparable. And it's because of that that God chooses to do a redo, to undo his creation, if you will, and to start anew. Because at this point, at the point of the corruption and the evil that the people, humanity reached, they would not be able to undo that which the destruction they had created. And that's actually why, and here, so let's look at the screen for a moment. The question, how is the flood a fair response, in a sense, to what's going on in the world? And so the answer, or an answer, my slides will let me, is the purpose of the world was for there to be free choice. Free choice allows a person to do what we'll call irreparable sin. So it wasn't a punishment of the individual, it was a total do-over. As a matter of fact, the verse that we heard, but now we'll examine again, is that God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupted. The Hebrew word for corrupted is nishchata. Nishchata means it became corrupt. Do you know what another translation for the very Hebrew word nishchata? The word nishchata means destroyed. So what the verse is saying, in a sense, is God saw the earth, and behold, it was destroyed. It was not recognizable compared to the divine vision, that God had for humanity, for the planet, this is not what the world was. And so not that, of course, the flood created devastation, but it was almost an automatic result for the devastation that occurred on this planet. So this is not the main question that we're going to discuss. I just wanted to make that small point. I'm certain that it bothers you, and I'm sure we'd like to discuss it further, but let's leave it at that because this is simply an intro. Now let's talk about some major questions that arise. Question number one. If a flood happened once because humanity messed up, well, then who's to say a flood can't happen again? Well, I'll tell you who's to say. God says he's not going to destroy the earth again. But the question is why? If humanity is granted free choice, and free choice led man down a path that ultimately was so destructive that the world, the whole proposition, the whole exercise is no longer worthwhile. Well, if that's the case, why can't it happen again? What changed on this planet? What did God do different? Did God limit our freedom of choice now? And conversely, if there is a fail-safe, if there is some kind of safety mechanism, why couldn't God imbue the world the first time around? Why did the world have to be destroyed once, and then God decides that the world will not be destroyed? There's an interesting observation. And again, I know some of you don't yet have the books. If you don't have a book yet, please reach out to me so I can deliver it to you. But if you do have a book, take a look on page 44, figure 2.1. And we're going to talk about an interesting comment that the Bible makes. Genesis chapter 6, verse 5 and 7. This describes the corruption that happened in the world. The verse says, God saw that every impulse of the thoughts of man's heart is only evil all day. God sees that man's heart is taking him in a dangerous place. God says, therefore, I will erase the human being that I have created from upon the face of the earth, from man to beast to crawling things. I have regretted that I made them. So God says, because the man has an evil impulse, which, by the way, we spoke last week, right? About how the serpent represented a external evil impulse. And once Adam and Eve went on to the next phase, they ate from the tree of knowledge. Now the evil is inside. So God's observing this evil impulse and says, you know what? Man is so evil. They need to be destroyed. They need to redo. Now look at the other side of the graph. Genesis 8:21. This is God's declaration after the flood. God said to his heart, nevermore shall I again curse the soil on account of man. Why is God no longer going to curse the soil because of man's behavior? For the impulse of the heart of man is evil from his youth. The very same rationale that man has this evil impulse is God's justification to never destroy the earth. Do you notice that? Isn't that interesting? Which one is it? Is the evil impulse, is the Yetzer Hara, is man's instinct a reason to destroy, or a reason that man should be immune to destruction? God uses the same argument or the same logic, and he takes it in two directions. Now, anybody here that has a background in debating knows that any fact, Dr. Moskowitz, I'm sure you're familiar with this, many others, any fact can be taken and used to make two opposite points. The question we have is, what really changed? Why does God make this change? So that's question number one. Why was there a flood the first time around, and what changed that makes us so certain, or that God is so certain he does not wish for there to be another flood? That's question number one. Question number two. Many of you are no doubt familiar with this question. Now, by the way, when I finish all the questions that we have in the lesson, I'll welcome any brief comments or questions, but I want to make sure that we don't keep everybody. It's hard to stay on Zoom for too long, so I don't want to stretch this out too long. Question number two, why an ark and why a year-long flood? Why does God choose to rehabilitate, to destroy, to reset through a year-long flood? As we know, God can do anything. Well, if he created the world, surely he can decide how he wants to do the undoing. Why a year-long flood? God could have done so many different things. I mean, we don't even know all the options, but God could have simply caused the lights to go out, if you will, and then a reset. God could cause some kind of, other kind of traumatic event, a solar flare, right? In 1 second, everything would be taken care of. And why does God choose to have an ark? As a matter of fact, you know how long Noah and his family were cooped up in the ark? If you take a look at text 2, page 45, I'm not going to read the whole text, but suffice it to say, the book known as Meshech Chachma of Rabbi Meir Simcha of Devinsk, one of the great scholars of the pre-war era, or before the Second War anyways, comments that Noah, his family, and all the animals remain in the ark for an entire year, 365 days. They enter the ark on the Hebrew date, the 17th of Cheshvan, and they come out of the ark an entire lunar year, 12 months, plus 10 days. So it's 355 plus 10 days. The 27th of Cheshvan, Noah and his family leave the ark. Why a year? What was going on? That's question number 2. Question number 3, my favorite. What is the significance of a rainbow? Where does a rainbow come in? Today, of course, the rainbow is a popular symbol. We all get a certain, feeling when you see the beautiful rainbow. And not long ago, I recall driving my children to school and seeing a double rainbow. And it's so beautiful, and it evokes all different kinds of emotions and responses. But why does the rainbow get mixed into this story? Why is the rainbow God's sign of his covenant that he'll no longer destroy the earth? And more specifically, are we making the claim that before the flood, there were no rainbows? God says, I will now give you the sign of a rainbow. So there are many commentaries, many authorities within the Jewish tradition that make the case that indeed planet Earth did not have rainbows until the flood. There are others, because as you know, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There are those who say that there were rainbows before the flood, but God chose to turn the rainbow into the symbol of God's compassion and God's assurance the world will never be destroyed. What is the connection between the rainbow and this new world that God is assuring Noah will be secure from devastation? Those are 3 major issues, 3 major questions. Again, I want to give you a recap. Question 1, what changed? Why can't the flood happen again? Big question number 1. Question 2, big question. Why does God choose the ark? Why does God choose a flood? And why for an entire year? Question 3, where does a rainbow come into the picture? I think those are all big, massive issues that all will give us a lot of insight and information into our flood narrative. We're going to see some very interesting things now. Are there any very brief questions or clarifying issues that need to be raised? Lynn, go ahead.
Myself, wait a minute.
We hear you.
You hear me?
Yes.
What's strange to me is that the animals and the children possibly were innocent. In other words, they were not.
They're not the ones that are being punished.
They were not evil. But yet they were destroyed also.
Yes.
So what is the reason, or why did that happen?
So that's the issue that I said I don't want to spend too much time on.
I know.
But the short answer that we gave is that it wasn't a punishment to the individual, because otherwise why are children being punished?
I know that.
It was a total reset that was necessary. And sometimes so it wasn't like the individual child was being singled out. The entire world was coming to a reset. So I'm not telling you that it should make you feel more comfortable, but just to understand what's happening here. This wasn't a punishment. The world needed a redo. I'll tell you just an example that comes to mind, and then we'll move on. Not because this isn't an important issue. It's a very important issue.
When he reset the world, he did it for a reason.
Correct.
The reason was because of the evil in the world.
Correct. But sometimes at this level, God did choose to give a total reset.
Okay.
But the point is that it's not a punishment that the children were not guilty, it was a total reset. It would be kind of like, and then I want to move on respectfully, because this is a very
Okay.
important issue, but we could have a whole separate issue on this subject.
Okay.
It's like when a boss fires a worker. So then if it's not for good cause, that's mean. You could make the case that it was unjustified, unwarranted. But if the whole business shuts down, it's not an indictment on the individual worker, the business closed. So the only point we're really making here is it's not that God was punishing the individuals as individuals. The whole business, the whole proposition is getting a reset. Take it or leave it. There's a lot more to say on the subject, but for the
Okay.
purpose of this course, let's leave it
Okay.
at that.
Fine.
Any other brief comments before we move
I
on?
have a question, Rabbi.
Yes.
This describes the nature of men on the earth before the flood as being evil.
Correct.
What is the nature of man after the flood? Is it still evil?
So you're asking a very good point. We made that point, although maybe I didn't emphasize it enough. Before, man has free choice, and man always had free choice. Before the flood, I shouldn't say mankind, humanity, descended into chaos, anarchy, and a total disabandon and disrespect for each other's private property, rights,
Sounds
and
like
did everything. And so they turned into a terribly immoral and criminal society. After the flood, man has the same inclination and instinct, but we'll see what's different. That's going to be one of the main issues of our course. But I just wanted to address beforehand, humanity literally unraveled. After the flood, there is also room, because man still has the same instinct or inclination in their hearts, but we'll see what changed. That's going to be one of the big issues of our discussion. One final comment. It has to be brief because we need to move on. Go ahead, David.
It'll be brief. I took the opportunity to read Rambam's commentary, and what
David,
was, yeah,
do me a favor. Don't go anywhere. Is this a comment that we can hold for the end of the course, or do we need to do it now?
no, why don't we just forget it?
No, I don't want to forget it. No, that would be a problem. Please hold on to it, and at the end of the course, please bring it up again. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. All right, let's jump in over here.
I
Do?
Mr. Newman, you have a fast comment?
do.
Go ahead, please.
I was always taught that Hashem could do anything with the blink of an eye.
He could,
Why did it take a year?
because that's the question of the course.
Good question.
That's the question of the course. A great question. Why did God choose to take a year? That's our question. Thank you for asking me. You did a better job than I did in conveying that question. So before we give our answers, which you'll either appreciate or you won't appreciate, but before we address them, we're going to now do a very interesting analysis, something I suspect you may have not done before. To answer these questions and to find our mystical, Kabbalistic angle, which, as you know, is on the way, we're going to first do something very interesting. If I had to sum up the whole story of the ark, which I kind of already did, I'd say like this. God created planet Earth. The human race became corrupted. God decides to bring a flood, wipe them out. Noah survived, and his family in the ark. That's the story of Noah's ark. But if you take a closer look, you might find something very, very interesting. It is not only the fact that God destroys evil society, it's almost a replication of the creation narrative. Let's take a look. There are today we're going to examine 5 parallels between the creation narrative and the flood narrative. If you've done this before, it'll be a review, but I suspect for many, this is the first time that you've seen such a comparison. It's very interesting. Issue number 1, creation story. The world comes into being, as we know, and this is in text 3, page 46. The earth was desolate and void, darkness on the face of the earth. The wind of God hovered upon the surface. God made the firmament. He separated between the waters that are below the firmament and the waters that are above. So the world begins with all water.
Mhm.
God then separates the water. There's the water up above and the water up below. And then out of the water emerges dry land. That is the creation narrative, a new world. In the flood, you've got the same exact idea. The new world re-emerges out of the water. That's parallel number 1. Parallel number 2. Actually, yeah, parallel number 2. The world is created by 10 creative utterances. Now, this is actually something that's brought in the Bible, but this is the Kabbalah, really, the Jewish mysticism really hones into this. God creates the world with 10 creative utterances. You may recall last week, we showed a diagram of the 10 components of the Sefirot, the 10 components of God's interaction with planet Earth, with humanity. Well, God expresses those 10 modes of interaction with 10 creative statements. That's how God creates the world, from words. Well, guess what? God brings forth the new world, if you will, the post-flood world regenerated by Noah, out of an ark. Do you know what the Hebrew word for ark is? Teva, which means a box. But you know what Teva really means? It means a word. Both realities come into being from a word. We're not done yet. In the creation story, God addresses Adam and Eve and tells them a blessing. And then he tells them, be fruitful and multiply. In the ark story, after Noah and his family exit the ark,
Right.
God tells them, you're blessed, be fruitful, and multiply. Next, in the creation story, what was the first step for mankind? Their first stop was in the Garden of Eden, right? We read last week, Adam and Eve start off in the Garden of Eden, eventually they leave the garden and they populate the earth. Well, guess what? According to the mystics, according to tradition, Noah's Ark had a utopian, messianic vibe. Where do we see this? I'll tell you. Imagine being cooped up with just your whole family in a box for 365 days. No garbage. You can't go out to put something in the dumpster. No run to the store. No cigarette break. No movie theater. You can't go out for a drink or for a coffee, no Starbucks. Imagine maintaining your sanity, being locked with your family for 365 days, no escapes, no breaks. Okay.
That's what we have now.
That's what we have now. Now imagine bringing into that mix every animal, either 2 of each animal or 14 of each animal. Now imagine maintaining your sanity, living cooped up in a box with your whole family at a zoo. You know how they maintain their sanity? Because God shone a little bit of a utopian, messianic light. Maybe Noah was putting some substances in the air, I don't know. But somehow they all remained mellow. And
They were smoking pot.
I was trying to say that without saying that, but something must have been going. So either they had a substance, or God created some kind of miraculous, mystical, messianic, utopian energy that kept everybody mellow and at ease. If we could only find some of that substance today, we'd all be a lot more sane and happy. But that's another commonality between the creation story and the ark. Another commonality. In the creation story, Adam had 3 sons, Cain, Abel, and Seth. Well, guess what? Noah also had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Oh. So there we have a whole bunch of common themes between the creation narrative and the flood narrative. They're almost identical. They're almost identical. It's actually quite striking to see all of those common parallels. If you look on page 49, figure 2.3, again, if you don't have a book, please reach out to me after this lesson or tomorrow and I will get you a book. But if you take a look real fast, we have a diagram, a figure that has exactly these points. Right? The world emerges, each world emerges from water, brought into being by utterances or a word. The same command, be fruitful, multiply, and be blessed. Each story starts out with utopia before propagating the earth. And each of the first couples, Adam and Eve, Noah and his wife, Nama, each of the first couple are identified as having had 3 sons. And so we have 2 stories, 2 versions of creation, which reminds me of the time that David, who was a top company executive, had to deliver a really important speech to the board of directors. He was really, really nervous. And he comes back and he's really angry. He storms into the office and he calls a speechwriter. And he says, Richard, the speech was a disaster. Everyone loved the first part, but as soon as I got to the second half, they all zoned me out. Some of them even walked out in the middle of the speech. Richard, the speechwriter, says, David, Yoko, I gave you 2 copies of the same speech in case you lose one of them. 2 speeches, 2 stories, 2 creations. And we got to understand why it had to happen twice and what's the reason behind these common themes. So before we give the Kabbalistic twist to understand why we had 2 almost identical stories, let's point out a few differences. Ready for some differences?
Yep.
Then we get to the Kabbalah. There's some differences. Lots of things are the same, but as much as things are the same, or as much as things are different, they're the same, but as much as things are the same, there's always differences. Difference number 1. Creation. Who created the utopian space? God. God planted the garden. Adam and Eve are meant to tend to the garden, but God plants the garden. Who created the utopian ark? Noah. Now, granted, God probably is the one who created the utopian energy, but the space is created by mankind. So distinction number 1 is who creates the environment, the first step of the new world. Step number 2, when God creates the world, creation, humanity, all happens after the water recedes. So the whole world is covered in water, the water recedes, and then creation begins. In the ark, humanity, all the animals that are going to repopulate the earth, all of the vegetation, everything was contained in the ark during the flood. Distinction number 2. Distinction number 3, although Adam had 3 sons, tragically, in the end, only one is the father of most of humanity. And certainly only one, Seth, is the one who has children who survive past the flood. Whereas in the ark, Noah has 3 sons and all of them are equally the fathers of modern post-flood civilization. So we have 5 similarities, 3 distinctions. If you look at figure 2.4, page 51, we've got a little chart that says utopian model was planted by God, whereas after the flood, the flood story, mankind, humanity create the ark. In the first creation, it happened after the water receded. Second story, humanity exists during the flood. Third of all, the first creation, there's one father. Everyone's related. In the second story, the flood, there's a pluralistic society descending from 3 different fathers, and each take on their own style, their own vibe, their own characteristic.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Did they have both Adam and Eve and also Noah? Did they just have sons? Didn't they have any daughters?
They had daughters. They had daughters. How do we know they had daughters? Well, because honestly, in the process of bearing children, the men are a little less consequential than the mothers. And so we know that they had mothers. This is my theory. The reason why we talk about the sons is because in the ancient world, clans were named after the parents. And so because eventually humanity was associated by these tribes, they're recorded with the names of the fathers. But it's absolutely certain and evident that they had wives. And actually they're mentioned not by name, but when it describes how Noah brought his whole family into the ark, it's clear that it's clear that alongside the sons are the wives. So that's a very good question, an important question. And it'll lead us to, I'm just going to mention another question that I'm not going to address here, but it's an important question, which is in the story of the flood, Noah's wife gets very little attention. Whereas in the story of Adam and Eve, Eve gets equal airtime. In the story of Abraham and Sarah, they both have equal airtime. And so why is Noah's wife barely mentioned? That's a question that some people asked me before the class. My theory is it seems like Noah was really a solitary man. He built the ark on his own. And it seems like even though he had sons, even though he had his wife, it seems like he was really a single meshugana. And so the story, I think, only talks about him to magnify the loneliness. This is my theory. The loneliness he must have felt and this sense of isolation from humanity. Because the story really portrays Noah as this poor guy alone apart from all of humanity. This is my theory. You may have other theories. And but that's just one man's opinion. I want to share that with you.
I was actually told by I don't know if he was Hasidic, but it was an Orthodox rabbi, that Noah didn't sleep next to his wife. For majority of the 365 days, he slept alone.
So let me just address that briefly and then we'll move on. Actually, all living beings that were in the ark were told to abstain from intimacy with their partners.
Okay.
Because if the world is being destroyed, you're going to have to at least abstain from basic pleasures and comforts. And so all animals and human beings were told to stay apart from their partners. But that I don't believe would answer the question of why the wife isn't really given much airtime. All right. So now that we understand that the story of the ark is very much a replay, a redo. Hold on, my slide is acting up. A redo of the first creation story. And God is essentially recreating the world. Again, we're not really up to the Kabbalah, but if you talk about creation and God's desire and intention, we're already starting to creep into the Kabbalistic arena, but we're not there yet. If God created the world once, and it wasn't good, and so God destroyed his creation and had to do it all over again, why didn't God just get it right the first time? Now you'll say, all of us, I'm sure everybody on this chat, in one sense or another, has experienced the need for a redo. Sometimes we do something once and it doesn't work. Some of us may be authors. I know we have authors on our chat. You have the Finces. And so certainly they could tell us, among others, that when you write a literary work, many times there are many iterations. And many times the first draft needs to be entirely scrapped before you can go on to do another one. Some people on this chat are businessmen or businesswomen who built up companies. And many times the first try doesn't always work. And you got to try again. So as humans, we try once, we try again. Some people, the first marriage doesn't work out and there's a second marriage. That's part of being human. Not every time, rarely our first attempt at a project works out. So we are very comfortable with do-overs and scrapping our first plan. But God's not a man or a woman. God's not a human being. And so all the flexibility and latitude and excuses that we'll create for ourselves, what's that got to do with God? Why does God need to try twice? So the answer, before really giving the answer, which is obviously that this is not because God couldn't get it right. There was purpose and intention in having these two iterations. Now, I'm going to put a footnote. Please don't get confused by here, but I know we have some Kabbalists here. So in addition to in the literal creation, having two creation narratives, those who are really big Kabbalah people know that there was also a spiritual world that was created and then scrapped. And if you're going to ever read in the Kabbalistic texts about the worlds of tohu, of chaos, and again, I'm just putting this as a teaser. In the Kabbalistic writings, there's a concept of a world of chaos, of tohu. This is describing a spiritual dynamic that was created was scrapped, and then God creates creation in its current iteration. And so there are two phases on the spiritual dimension of creation. And although the first iteration is scrapped, there is significant interplay. Again, if you ignore what I'm saying or put this on as a side note. And so for those that are familiar with the Kabbalistic concept of collecting sparks, every time we do a good deed, we find a spark and we elevate a spark. This is known as Lorian Kabbalah. That idea is predicated on the fact that God created a spiritual world. It didn't work out. It exploded, if you will, and there are sparks around latent in this world that we elevate during creation. That was a footnote just to confuse you all, to throw you all off. But let's go back to our discussion. Creation 1 in the beginning of Genesis, creation 2, God's redo through the flood and Noah. Why doesn't God get it right the first time? That's our question. So it's kind of the way the story is being presented, God learns from his mistakes. But God has no mistakes. That's certainly not the case the Bible is going to make us, that God makes a mistake. So why? Let's do a fast recap. Questions, recap. Hold on, you don't see okay here. Question recap. Question number 1, why can't the flood happen again? Question 2, why was it a year-long process? And if you can include the construction of the ark, we're talking about hundreds of years of ark construction. Number 3, why a rainbow? Isn't that a pretty picture? Number 4, why not begin with plan B? Why didn't God start off with the iteration that he really wanted? Good questions, powerful questions, questions that stop and make us think. Let us now talk a little Kabbalah. If those who study Kabbalah know that a lot of the ideas of Kabbalah touch very deeply upon the notion of relationships. That's why psychology is into Kabbalah and Kabbalah is into psychology a little bit. Because what is Kabbalah? Kabbalah is essentially looking at the mechanics, the spiritual mechanics of God, his choice to create, his interaction with mankind, the way humanity can connect to the spiritual, the metaphysical, and the way God connects to the material. It's all about a relationship with the world and the divine, the creator and his world. And so being that it's all about a relationship between God and this planet, Kabbalah talks a lot about relationships. And many times, understanding dynamics of relationships help us have a little more of a sense of what a godly, divine, creator relationship is with this planet. The deeper you get into Kabbalah, the more we find constant reference to relationships. But now we're talking about the basic building blocks of these ideas. So, when examining the relationship between God and the world, there are different kinds of relationships. But let's first talk about interpersonal relationships. If you were to program a robot to react and to respond to certain stimuli, certain commands, could you describe yourself as having a relationship with that robot? Now, I know I'm going to get myself into trouble because today robots have really gone into a world that's hard to imagine. But suffice it, let's leave it at this. If you create your own robot, your relationship with a robot's not your relationship with something else. It's a relationship with yourself, the way you're projecting on the robot. God wants to have a real relationship with humanity. He needs to create creatures who feel independent of God. And that's why all of us, according to the Kabbalistic teachings, although God created us, and without God we wouldn't exist, and without God consistently choosing to keep us plugged in and alive, we would not exist. God dumbs us down to the point where we're not aware of the fact that it is he who's creating us. Because God wants to have a relationship with people that have free will. So the only way God could have a really wholesome relationship with us is if we have the capacity to rebel, to reject him. And that's really what last week's discussion was about. God wants us to have free choice. Because if we can reject him, then we can accept him and be in a loving relationship. Now, there are two kinds of relationships. There is a relationship that our course will describe as top-down. The authority, the dominant individual in the relationship, defines the entirety of the relationship. Let's just, to make things simple, describe it. So we're talking about one direction. Have you ever been in a relationship where you or the other person entirely defines and controls and drives that relationship? I'm sure everyone has had that. Maybe it was some kind of professor or person you looked up to, or a parent maybe. Some parents are pretty much the top down. The example that Kabbalah is going to bring in this discussion is a teacher who feeds information to the student without really seeking or building up the student who's listening. So, in such a scenario, as long as the teacher is up preaching and the student's listening, well, there is a relationship, but it's very much top down, without being without being self-critical, without being critical of myself. I'd say that in Chabad we have different courses, and some classes are much more top down, where I'm doing most of the talking. Dare I say this class might be one of those examples. But then we have other meetings, like our Parsha Tuesday discussion, which is very much a two-way discussion, where the members of the discussion group many times can dictate or change the course of the class. So you have relationships that are top down, like a teacher who just simply teaches or talks or gives facts to the students. But then you have another relationship, which we'll call bottom up, because the teacher, the dominant party, gives the flexibility and allows and facilitates the passive partner or the lower person in that relationship to also have a say, and gives them the capacity to chart their course or to influence the relationship. An example we'll give is a student who the teacher gives skills to be able to independently assess and analyze information. And I'm sure all of us can think back to certain kinds of classes or courses or lessons where all we were doing was absorbing data, information, and facts. And then you had other teachers who really helped us mold the way we think and the way we see things. And in a way, I'd say the teacher that just is giving information, that's entirely dictated by the presence of the teacher. When the lecturer is not present, there is no relationship. But a truly gifted and blessed scenario is that the teacher, the dominant person, gives you the ability to independently assess, analyze, and become an authority on the given subject. One relationship we'll call top down, one directional. The other one is bottom up, because the student or both people have input in that relationship. These are ideas that exist in our world. It could also exist in a relationship with children, or a spouse, or a friend, or a boss. Right? A boss might be a good example, where sometimes the boss doesn't give any room for the employee's input, feedback, and independent thinking. That's probably not a great arrangement. And then sometimes the boss wants the person that's working for him to have initiative and gives them some latitude to come up with ideas and to input into the company and into the project. These two relationships help us understand two different ways that God interacted with planet Earth and humanity. Just to give the fast answer first. Sorry. Before the flood, pre-flood, it was a top-down, one-directional relationship. God created man. When they got things right, they listened to him, it was good. As soon as man spiraled out of control, as soon as the people, the human beings, sinned, the relationship terminated, because they don't have the ability to re-establish the connection. After the flood, even though humanity can mess up, we're imbued with the capacity to recreate the relationship. So even if we mess up and God is disappointed, we have the ability to reassert, reestablish a relationship. We can reconnect a relationship. And that's, in a sense, what we're saying is that God gives humanity after the flood the ability to independently find God, to rehabilitate our relationship. And that's why Abraham, who was born after the flood, how does his relationship with God start? Abraham initiates it with his own journey, with his own exploration, with his own thought. Before the flood, that would have been impossible. And now we have the answer to question number 1. The first creation was entirely from God. God dictates the entire world. Once the world became corrupted, it needed to be terminated because there was no salvation. It was beyond repair. Humanity now, however, after the flood, can recreate, reassert, and reestablish the relationship. And for that reason, the flood doesn't need to happen again because the world is now redeemable. All it takes is a human being like Abraham or one of us, even if we feel like we've messed up, to reassert, reestablish, and connect with God. And he allows us to do so. I think that's a powerful point. And it's actually, although we're using simple words, I think, this is a powerful idea in Kabbalah, in the Kabbalistic Aramaic words, in case you're interested. We talk about itaruta, dilatata, where humanity, mankind, the lower world can instigate a relationship with God. Versus itaruta de la'ela, where the relationship is entirely established, created, controlled by above, by God. And the moment we mess up, lights are out. That's answer to question number 1. Oh, question number 2, or actually no, question number 3, I think it was, right? Was what's the deal with the rainbow? Why is there a rainbow after the flood? Anybody want to try to take a guess about why the rainbow before we go to a little short film and I give the explanation? Because I'm doing a little too much talking. Anyone, theory on the rainbow. What's the connection between the rainbow and the flood?
Give them hope.
The rainbow give them hope. Absolutely. The rainbow does give hope. I think it's beautiful. It's probably one of the most beautiful things that exist on this planet.
Made them feel good.
It feel
Wasn't
good,
he on the ark, so it just made them feel good? Kept
so
them
you're saying that the colorful artistic value of the rainbow makes them feel good and helps them. Okay, I'll take that.
Can I say something? Can I say something?
Please do. Is that Malka? Malka,
Yes,
welcome.
it is. Thank you. What I'm thinking, it's possible when we all see it, so we go like, wow. So it's like kind of shake us up, like to shake you, to like or remind you of something, or like, wow, like you know, just like extra beautiful, something so beautiful, and it's like above the nature. Like, how did that happen? Like to make you think deep, maybe, possibly, or basically one word is like to shake you up. I don't know.
So Malka, I think what you're saying, and I certainly like this, there's few things in the nature that so utterly catches our attention and makes us pause for a moment than a rainbow. I said in nature, because today we can manufacture and create all different wondrous things. But in nature itself, there are a few things that just suddenly appear that cause us to stop in our tracks. I would say, and probably someone's thinking, well, the ocean does that, but the ocean is kind of predictable. It doesn't, it's pretty much, we pretty much have to go find the ocean to have that reaction. Whereas the rainbow happens. It's God giving us a sign. I love that. So the rainbow gets our attention. Sheila says it gives us comfort. It's beautiful.
Vibrancy.
Malka says it just catches our attention, makes us stop and think.
Mm-hmm.
Lynn, you said something because then I want to hear from Mordechai.
The vibrancy of it.
The vibrant, rich colors.
Colors, beautiful colors, all together.
Absolutely. Mordechai, and then Dr. Moskowitz. Mordechai has a comment.
Rabbi,
Yes.
To me, the rainbow, it seems like a binding contract that God is manifesting to us that there is peace and there is not going to be any more destruction. Apparently, that's the reason why we have multiple colors, because the world is full of colors, and it goes from one end to the other, so they know that it's going to be the entire world and not just that part. even though that scientifically, once you put light towards
Here, Mordechai, don't give it away. We're gonna discuss that in a moment. But as always, Mordechai, you're ahead of the curve. But that's not surprising because as a mystic and a scholar, I wouldn't expect any other way. Thank you. So Mordechai is telling us the rainbow is a sign of God's presence. The rainbow spans the sky, the sky from one side to the other. Dr. Moskowitz, Mordechai, I didn't mean to cut you short. I just want to I want to just get a little sampling of everyone's sense. Dr. Moskowitz, it's wonderful to have you on. Want to tell us something about a rainbow?
Rainbows come after the rain.
Rainbows come after the rain. The doctor always has the most practical connection. A flood ostensibly came from the rain. The rainbow in our psyche is, of course, associated with rain. And so it reminds us, the doctor is saying, and I can't disagree, it reminds us that, this rainbow happened after a flood. Well, last time a flood happened, it was a lot worse. I want to say something else, which is not exactly the answer of this course, but all your comments have made me think. When we mess up and God might want to destroy the world, it means that the world has gotten ugly. And so God is reminding us of the potential for beauty. He's showing us a rainbow. He's showing us the world can be a beautiful place and we can make it happen. So that's not the answer of the course, but I think that's an essential answer. God reminds us of the potential for beauty. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
But God reminds us of beauty in other ways also.
Certainly. So that's why the
moonrise.
Of course, but that's why we're going to give a Kabbalistic answer that's going to put it all together.
Okay.
But I wanted to, I would say like this, there's probably nothing else that really catches our attention. And I'm sure the study has been done. Every civilization has their own myth and story and legend about the meaning of the rainbow, but it's something that you can't avoid. You can't escape. It's like God is putting on a show. Before we had television, and before we had any kind of media, before we had art installations and art galleries, God would on occasion gift us with this artistic installation. There's something, and it doesn't escape our attention. And so the rainbow is something very, very powerful. And that is for sure the case. Now, any final comments before I show you a little film about how a rainbow practically works, which again, many of you know this, but it's good to review. And then we're going to see what the Kabbalah has to say about that process. Any closing comments about the rainbow? All right. Before I show you this little film, I just want to share with you that, of course, we know that humanity, every human being, is a microcosm of the planet. King Solomon says, the world he placed in our heart, which means that things that happen in the world happen in humanity, and things that happen in our heart are also manifest on this planet. And so being that the dynamic of the relationship between every individual and God changed before the flood to after the flood, namely, human beings have the ability to independently reassert, reestablish, and God gives us the ability to choose how our relationship works with God. Well, there's something similar that happens in the world. Just like we said, there's a bottom up. The world can be involved in the process and the story. And let's see how the science of the rainbow depicts and portrays this idea. I just gotta move. There we go.
Rabbi?
Yes?
Why is it that God is always doing something that reflects onto another state of being? Why can't he just take the straight line, make you feel good, or make you feel, without seeing a rainbow, feel good? Without, no rainbow, your wife yells at you, feel bad. Simple. I don't understand.
Because God didn't create all of this world to be two-dimensional. God created a rich, textured, complex world, a world where when we work hard, we feel great. And when we succeed, we feel great. And when we fail, we feel driven to try again. And true reward, internal and external, comes from effort. So in addition to certain straightforward and simple events, I'm not saying that simple events don't exist and shouldn't exist, but there's always a deeper, more complex part of the story. And so, I'm sorry, just one more thing before we go to the film. So just like mankind had a fundamental change in their relationship with God, Well, planet Earth itself had some fundamental changes. And one of those changes are expressed and manifest in the rainbow. So what is a rainbow? Without getting complicated, let's see a little film about how the rainbow works. Of course, you know it's about the way light interplays with a prism and the way the light is separated. Let's see the film because honestly, science isn't my thing. And so I'll let the video talk for me.
A ray of light is made up of the same 7 colors seen in a rainbow. This is seen when a ray of light is shone at an angle through a prism, a triangular-shaped piece of glass. Light slows down as it goes from air to glass and causes the ray of light to bend. This is called refraction. Each color in a ray is bent at a different angle, allowing 7 colors to be seen. The red light gets bent the least, while the violet light bends the most. Sunlight, therefore, is key to the science of rainbows. Light travels more slowly through water than air, so that raindrops act as prisms, bending, separating, and reflecting the light that shines through them. We can see a rainbow because the separated light is reflected toward our eyes.
So, in a sense, I forgot who said this. Not only does the rainbow follow the rain, but the rainbow is created by the way the rain or the mist or the clouds interplay with the sunlight. That's the way a rainbow works. Of course, seeing it without thinking of all the science makes it much more fascinating. Hold on, doctor, 1 second, then I want to hear your comment. And so why did God choose the rainbow as the sign? Well, because the rainbow is symbolic of this same change on planet Earth. Just like following the flood, God said, human beings, I'm not going to destroy you again because you're redeemable. You can fix and reestablish your relationship with God. Well, God created a symbol on this earth that represents the interplay of the rising mist and the light from above. The light from above is representative of God, the heaven, and the rising moisture and droplets, which even rain, of course, is a result of the evaporated moisture on the earth. And so it represents the interplay between above and below, the two-directional relationship that exists between heaven and earth, between man and God, and the rainbow is the beautiful embodiment of that dynamic. The interplay of the light from above and the moisture, the mist from below. And so God chooses as a symbol of the two-directional relationship and the ability of mankind to chart its own course, to choose and create its own destiny, and to redeem itself in the rainbow, which is the physical manifestation of the earth and the heaven interacting in this beautiful manner. And so the rainbow is a mirror to remind us of the relationship that exists between man and his creator. And now we understand why the rainbow only appeared, according to some opinions, after the flood. Because before the flood, human beings didn't have much of a voice. All they had to do was follow. They had to listen. The moment they changed the channel, they tuned God out, they couldn't reestablish the connection. The hardware was smashed. The only choice is a hard reset. God has to destroy the earth. After the flood, we can get God's attention. We can choose to repair, to reassert our relationship with God. And now we understand why the rainbow. Because the rainbow embodies and portrays the very point of after the flood. Now we might understand why it had to be a year-long process of a flood, and why Noah spent many years building the ark. If it was a top-down relationship, God's defining and imposing everything about this relationship, well, then he could finish the whole thing in a flash, a sun flare. Because the ark is about creating a new world, a world where what mankind does makes a difference. Well, to represent that idea, to embody that idea, Noah had to get to work and a hard, long course to represent the hard, long, but rewarding process we must undertake in this new post-flood era. Because we're the ones that decide and influence the relationship with God. And that's why God allowed a natural process to cause the destruction and cause the reset. Granted, that much water was not natural, but God let the water come, let the water naturally subside, because nature itself had to change. Nature itself had to represent the fact that nature makes a difference, earth makes a difference, humanity makes a difference. And that's why Noah had to take a long time. That answers that question. And now we also understand why originally God created the Garden of Eden, but Noah created the ark. Because when God created the Garden of Eden, that was the beginning of a chapter of top down. God established everything about the relationship. The ark, the utopia that served as the inspiration for the new world, had to be created, established by humanity. And because it's all about what happens on the person's part with God, well, every person is different. And to represent that, the fathers of humanity after the flood, and when I say fathers, I mean families. There's not one family. It's not only Seth, it's three. To represent the diversity of style and how, notwithstanding our differences, we can all assert, establish, and influence how God relates with us and our world. Just to review it in the slides, pre-flood, top down, we can only observe from God. God created the Garden of Eden. Post-flood, it's bottoms up. We can interact with the divine. So why can't the flood happen again? Because God gave us the ability to recreate our relationship and to be rehabilitated. Why the rainbow? This is the physical manifestation of the relationship and the interplay between heaven and earth. Top down, everything is determined by the giver, the teacher, the dominant person in the relationship. Bottom up, it's determined by the recipient, the passive, the student has the ability to make all the difference. Pre-flood, it was all about God's action. Post-flood, it needed to be natural, representing the influence and the authority of human beings. And so why were there differences? Creation was planted by God because God is the one who's determining everything in phase one. The ark was humanly constructed, representing our greater role on this earth. Divine action. After the flood, it's a natural process. Number two, when God created the world, there's only one Father. When there's a natural process, there's diversity. Again, that's what I just said. Now, why a long process? You have to come through a natural process. And so we have, in a sense, two models. God's dominating, human beings are dominating. So why didn't God just go to plan B? The one that's going to work? That one that allows us to be rehabilitated? Because ultimately there needs to be two parts in a relationship. It can't be exclusively God or the dominant person. It can't be exclusively the humanity or the lower people. There needs to be a two-directional relationship. And that's why God created a plan A and a plan B, because plan B is not simply giving humanity the ability to chart our own course, but it's really to establish a two-way relationship. And so it wasn't a mistake that God should have been able to predict, but it was intentional to give us the rich complexity that exists in our world, in our life, and to establish this two-way relationship. And what's the ultimate goal? To hear the calling of God, as Mordechai is certainly going to say, to hear his urging, to be attuned to the signs he provides for us, maybe like a rainbow. But when God's channel goes silent, when we're feeling uninspired, when we're feeling out of touch, or when we're feeling disappointed at our own failure, that's not a reason to clear the deck, to clear the game, and to start over. No. God allows us to be the one to pick up the phone, to reassert the relationship, to call to God. And then when we call to God, we restart that connection. God picks up the phone as well. And that's why there had to be a plan A, there had to be a plan B. And that's why the Kabbalah loves the story of the flood, because it's a reminder of how much power, how much spiritual power, how much force, and how much energy is at our fingertips. You do a mitzvah, you do something good, we're not just screaming and no one's listening. We're actually establishing, creating, and defining our destiny, our connection to Hashem, our relationship with God. And that's why the story of the flood is so important. That's why we're so important. Because ultimately, God wants to give us a voice. God wants to empower us. And we are empowered. And that all started the day Noah and his family stepped off the ark. My dear friends, I want to thank you all for joining us for this tease on a very important and broad topic of Noah and the ark, the mystery of the rainbow. This concludes the formal part of today's discussion. Let me just get up to date on the slides. Then I'm going to invite comments, and I'll stay on as long as we have what the shmooze about. So, hey. So here, just real fast, just one more time. Creation was after the water receded. The ark was simultaneous because we're unifying both models, heaven and earth. We did this already. The takeaway is we got to be receptive to the call of God and proactive in our relationship with God and with each other. Sometimes we need to respond. Sometimes we need to listen. Sometimes we need to establish. And that is
Lesson 2.
And that is this week's lesson. If you want to check out if you want to see the slides or some of the films, you want to review it, you can go to myjli.com/Bible. See the slides, continued reading, and other cool stuff. Next week, hey, well, they didn't give me the slides, but next week, we're going to talk all about Jacob and Esau, the two twins who could not figure things out. And so that's going to be next week's lesson. Again, thank you all. It's been great to have you all on. For those that are listening in the future, glad to connect to you across time and space. And now we'll keep the floor open. Any comments or questions? I think Dr. Moskowitz was trying to get my attention. I'm sorry I didn't get to you sooner. So you get the floor first. Dr. Moskowitz, go ahead. Anyone that needs to go, no pressure. Although, of course, I'd love to have you stay on longer. It's always good to schmooze, but there's no pressure. Dr. Moskowitz, go ahead.
Well, you know where I'm going to be coming from, right? I like the Noah story very much because I think most of these stories are really metaphors. And the metaphor that I get out of this is because I understand the rainbow very much because the white light coming from the sun hits the atmosphere and the weakest wavelength is blue. So that's why the sky is blue. And when the sun sets at night, it's red because red's the strongest. So when you see your rainbow, red is always on top and blue is on the bottom, and the colors of the spectrum are there. Because white light, if you put your diamond ring on, you lucky ladies, and you put the white light on, all those different colors will come out. I like it, and I accept it as a metaphor because it teaches us that there is hope after disaster.
That's beautiful. Doctor, thank you for putting it in those words. I appreciate it. That's beautiful. And it's also good to have a scientist on the call. It can really help us understand this light situation. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Aviva. Good to have you on. Who's next? Any comments or questions?
That's why the sun is red at night, because red is the strongest wavelength and comes through.
Aha. Oh. There you go. We should listen to the scientists a little more often. We'll learn something.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Anyone else? Rav Mordechai, Esther, wonderful to have you on. We missed you last week. Thank you.
Thank you for the class. It's very interesting.
This was very enlightening, and you really brought out the best of it to be able to indicate to us, the meaning of actually the way that God is intended to create the world, and why is it that we have to look for reflection inside of us so that we can look for eternal life.
Thank you.
So being, I guess, sort of a namesake of the story.
Yeah, you have to have a Noah on this discussion.
I've had many rabbi and many, I guess, Hasid or Orthodox Jew approach me and tell me stories of my namesake. and it went from different drunken, nonsensical stories to actually biblical, backgrounds. And hearing it like this is actually a lot better than hearing it in some drunken Purim story or whatever.
In general, drunk might be fun, but if you want the facts,
exactly.
You want a sober conversation. Nina, I want to tell you how wonderful it is to have you on. It's great to see you, and you're muted right now, but I'd like to welcome you back. Sheila.
She was so happy. I figured it out with your help. The only thing I know now is about the stop video. What it means, stop video and stop video. You have to tell me something.
Okay, well, so Sheila, we'll reconnect and figure it out. Okay.
All right, but at least we can hear each other. It was a wonderful evening tonight. I enjoyed it very much.
Absolutely. Nina?
I think I'm unmuted now.
Now we hear you.
Yes, thank you.
I hope you weren't trying to talk earlier because
No.
But it's good to have you on.
I was trying to think and follow.
Okay, that's good.
I thought it was extraordinarily interesting. There was one thing that I was thinking of, and that is that with Adam and Eve is the beginning, in a sense, of wisdom, right? Where do they eat from? The tree. Yes. But following it through to the Noah story, out of the Noah story also comes what we know as the Noahide laws, which are the early basis of the commandments. And there's the creation of civilized living. And I thought that was also a part of the story that could be important.
Absolutely. Let me just add, I'm glad you brought that up. It's that idea that if mankind can be in charge and make a difference and assert a relationship, well then rules are that much more important. Because if nothing makes a difference, or if it's so easy to fail, well then human beings might give up. But now that mankind knows they're redeemed, they can be redeemed, and they can repair, and they can fix, and they can establish a relationship, well then 7 general laws for moral social living are that much more important. So I'm glad you brought that up, and it certainly plugs in very nicely to the story and the theme that we're discussing here. Thank you.
Rabbi?
Thank you. Lynn.
Okay. I just want to say that this theme of redemption is carried out through the entire Bible.
Yes.
In other words, it's repeated. This message seems to be repeated many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it started with Noah, but then it says it over and over again in the Bible.
Absolutely. It's one of the, well, look, the Bible is all about reminding us that what we do matters. And even when we mess up, there's room for redemption. You're right. I would say if we had to collect the most essential principles of and the teachings of the Bible, I would certainly rank redemption, rehabilitation, and the value of what we do even after failure ranks really high up as one of the most important principles. And I think for living, for keeping our sanity, these are truly important messages, because we can, and we all experience and have failures, and we all experience painful disasters and things that really stop us in our tracks. And Judaism and the Torah reminds us and reminds humanity that there's light and there's a rainbow after the flood.
That's right.
And
look at it this way, Rabbi. Hello to everybody. It's so good to see everyone, really. But not even the pandemic was able to destroy the ability for us to share with you and for you to provide the knowledge through this channels that I don't understand how they work, but at least I know that I can see you all. So I thank God for that rehabilitation and the hope that we can continue communicating no matter what happens.
Absolutely. Very good, very good. Everyone, wonderful to see you. Joy, it's good to have you on. There's a number. Joy, are you on twice? Or who is 954-458-4572?
Yes. I tried to I'm on the phone because I can hear better. And then when you mentioned that there was a video, I used my phone, so perhaps it counted 2 times.
No worries. I wanted to make sure I wasn't overlooking somebody. So.
No, that is true. I did put the Zoom on to see the video.
Good. Well, thank you. It's great to have you on. Sheila, the Moskowitzes, Reb Noyach, Nina, the Finches, the Newmans, Lynn, everyone, thank you all for being on. It's good to connect, even if it's over a Zoom.
Yes,
and I hope we'll see everybody, God willing, next week, if not sooner, Wednesday, 7 p.m. And again, we're going to talk about those 2 twins who just couldn't figure it out. Have a great evening. Stay safe and healthy. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Stay well and stay safe.